Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are, whenever you're watching this. This is Floating in Dreams. Today's video is going to be all about palettes I wish existed. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. Today's video is going to be all about palettes I wish existed. So this is a hypothetical video where we're going to chat about things that I would like to see more of or less of. I'm not really going to be doing any mock-ups or anything like that. I actually have 2 videos already where I'm showing you like a mocked up palette, like what my favorite perfect palette would look like. So make sure to link those in the description box down below. But this is just going to be a chatty video where I say about things that I would like to just wish just existed and that aren't really out there all that much. So that's what this video is going to be all about. In case you're new here, let me introduce myself. My name is Maaike. I live in the Netherlands. I like to come on here to chat about eyeshadow palettes, S's and Catrice reviews, and getting the use out of my makeup. And because I have fair skin with a cool to neutral undertone, I deem myself a snow angel. So if you'd like to join the Snow Angel Club, then definitely click subscribe below and join my little family on here. So yes, eyeshadow palettes I wish existed. I've come up with like 10 different things that I think just should be on the market a little bit more. And I think if you're familiar with my content, then I think you know what you can expect here. Cool tones, because I'm all about the cool toned life. I just feel that cool tone palettes need a bit of work, and I'm just going to chat about the 10 things that I would like to see brands do just a little bit more when it comes to eyeshadow palettes, and what I would like to see less of at the same time. So let's just start with the first point I want to make in this video. I would like to see more actual cool tone palettes that are actually cool toned. And let me get down to it, because this is just one really big pet peeve. I have seen either brands or creators saying like, oh, this is such a good cool tone palette, and then I get it home and then it's just not that cool toned. Like, maybe it's just me, but I feel that like undertones just show up differently on other people. And if you have a warm undertone and you're using a true cool tone palette, it can look really ashy on you. So that's why I think a lot of people go like, ooh, this is a cool tone palette, but because they have a warm undertone or an olive undertone, or they have deep skin or whatever, and then I come in with my fair skin and with like, who prefers a pink tone foundation over a yellow tone foundation because it just works a little bit better on me. And then, you know, I try it and I just feel like, but this isn't cool toned at all. So there are a couple of like seemingly cool tone color stories that I feel work really well as a cool tone palette on people with warm undertones, but that if you have a cool undertone or a more neutral leaning one, it can still look a little bit murky. And I think that that's the reputation that a lot of cool tone palettes have just gotten over time, is that they look muddy or ashy. And that's why I feel brands stay away from making true cool tone palettes. There's always like that one gold that's like randomly in that palette, and I'm like, why did you not turn that into like a very pale taupe or whatever, you know? So I feel that getting true cool tones in palettes is something that is very hard to come by, and that it just leaves out swaths of people. And I don't know what happened here, because I'm not sure if my makeup my makeup memory serves me right here, but I feel that like a decade ago, 10 to 15 years we're talking here, like around the 2010s starting, that there were so many more cool toned options on the market. If I look back at makeup that I used to own, like I've been blogging since 2010, so I have a whole catalog of pictures I've taken over time of products I owned, and there were just so many more cool tones out there, it seems, or maybe that's just what I was buying, I don't know. But in my memory, before 2015, 2016, we got so many more cool tones. And right now it's like the minute something truly cool tones comes out, it's like, ooh, it's ashy, and then it doesn't get talked about. So for me, please, we need more actual cool tone palettes that pull cool toned on cool tone people. Can we do that? Please, please. Sorry, I went off. That was a tangent. That was a tangent. I promise I won't be this passionate about all of these topics. But my second point is related to more cool tone palettes. If we're doing cool tones, can we not make them gray? Like, very often if a brand commits and they're doing the cool tones, it's going to be grays. And I love a gray. I love a gray. Don't get me wrong, I love grays, but it's a bit like the white and the black in every single eyeshadow palette that you probably have lying about. Like, how many whites and blacks do we need at the end of the day? So I wish there was more innovation in terms of what a cool tone can be, just like we've seen an innovation as to what a warm tone neutral can be. Before 2016, no one in their right mind would have thought that an orange could be a neutral. And then all of a sudden, when warm tones were all the hype, we got reds and berries and oranges and mustards that were suddenly deemed neutrals. And I just wish we could get that trend, but then the opposite end of the color spectrum. So more cool toned leaning. So browns, blues, like I love grays when they have a blue undertone. So maybe we need more grays with green undertones, and maybe browns with gray undertones, and maybe a hint of navy in there. Like, I think we can blend new colors, right? So why is everything so samey? So I feel that if we are going to be doing more cool tones, I want them to lean more cool tone brown. So like a really good chocolatey brown and coffee colors. Like those things I feel aren't around much. And that's just what I really want. So if we're doing cool tones, instead of grays, make them browns. Thirdly, this is beyond my cool tone love. I also love a good colorful palette from time to time, but a lot of colorful eyeshadow palettes are monochrome. And I'm like, do we really? Like, can we only do a green tone palette if it's only green tones? Like, can we not mix and match it with some other things? And I just feel that there are just too many of these out there, and once you've tried one, you have that color story. So you want a good blue tone palette, buy one blue tone palette, and you're set for the rest of your time, for the rest of your life in terms of blue tones. You just will. Purple is a more difficult shade to get right. There are a lot of undertones in purples, like they can be cool toned and warm toned, but that's because there's more of a blend. Like if they pull more blue tone, there's a bit more blue added to it. If they're more warm toned, they usually have a bit more red. But of course with like blues and I feel greens as well, it seems to be a lot of like the samey kind of things that are going on. So colorful palettes, yes, but I want the color stories to be more interesting than a monochrome color story. Like, can we start blending colors in one palette again, please? Thank you very much. Number 4, also about colorful palettes. Can we please make colorful palettes that aren't just rainbows with mid-tone bright matte shades? Because, don't get me wrong, I love a good rainbow color story, but once you've tried one, you've tried them all, a little bit with the monochromatic blue tone palette that I just chatted about. You just need one rainbow palette and you're good to go. You can do every look that you want. You can do your sunset eyes. You can do your rainbow eyes. You don't need every single rainbow color story on the planet. This is why I've started to appreciate Blend Buddy Cosmetics quite a bit, because they are doing colorful palettes. They are still very rainbow though, but they are doing gradients. So they're not just giving you all of these mid-tone bright shades and not only mattes, which is something that I feel is very much lacking in the colorful makeup spectrum, is good shimmers that can really amp up the look. Very often, just look around, just type in rainbow eyeshadow palette. Every single one of them is going to be very matte heavy. If they do shimmers, they only do a handful usually. There aren't just that many like really good colorful shimmer shadows out there, and definitely not in palettes. And I'm like, you know what? I wish there were just better color stories if we're doing colorful things, not make them monochromatic, not make them the other opposite end of that sort of like, and just put a couple of bright ones together and call it a rainbow. But I feel we should have more variety there, more depth, more shimmers, more textures, and then I feel that we could get a little bit more interest in colorful shadows again, at least for me, because that's what I want. Number 5 has to do with actually something I've just touched upon, which is the textures that we get in a palette. Can we please just make a 50-50 split between mattes and shimmers? That way everybody has a little bit of everything. I feel that these very matte heavy palettes, I mean, I love some of the color stories that Unearthly Cosmetics does, and then I look at it and it's got no, like not even a single shimmer. And I'm like, I know I won't use a palette like that. I just don't love matte eyeshadow with this eye shape that I've got going on. Like, I don't have the eye shape to be doing all of these graphic things. It just doesn't work. I need shimmer to make sure that things catch the light and that my eyes don't look like too hollow black, like I was punched in the face. Because that's what ends up happening when I use too many mattes. It just doesn't look very dimensional because I have very deep set eyes. Mattes are just not perfect. So I prefer shimmer because the shimmer, the sparkle in it will push my eyes forward and it will brighten up my eyes and make them look a lot bigger than when I'm using a matte. So that's why I prefer shimmers over mattes. And I just feel there are so many incredibly matte heavy palettes on the market, and I'm always like, can we get some more shimmers? Menagerie is another brand. I love their shimmer formula, but they seem to mainly do like 1 or 2, maybe 3 shimmers at most. I think that Sugar High palette finally has some more shimmers, which is why that is sort of like still tickling the edge of my brain, but I feel that the color story of that is just not exciting enough for me to get it. So yeah, when it comes to any palette, make sure that we get equal amount shimmers over mattes, and then I'm your gal. I really like that. I just love it if a brand has enough shimmers for me to really make it work. I just do. Something that I want less of, number 6, is fewer duochromes and multichromes to round out a palette. So what I have seen, now that duochromes and multichromes have become sort of like, not this like super special thing anymore, but every brand seems to want to do them now. But sometimes you get duochromes or multichromes in palettes, and then I'm like, but I can only use this with like one look I can do with this palette. So I feel it takes a little bit of versatility out of a palette if there are too many. So when it comes to like these like flippy shades, I like them if I can use them as toppers. So if there is a matte that, for instance, is a little bit dark for me, but then I pop that topper over it and it does work, then I like it. But if there are too many saturated multichromes in a palette, looking at you, adept, then I feel I can't really blend the shades together because then it turns into quite a murky mess. I love the Adepta palettes I've tried. Really, like the Ninhydrin and the Plain Jane Remastered, both of them are really, really pretty. But I feel that some of the undertones, especially with multichromes, can be very difficult to gauge from a pan or a finger swatch. And then I put it on my eyes and I was like, oh, I thought it was gonna go with this eyeshadow and it actually doesn't. So then like the entire concept for the look that I have in my head kind of falls apart. So for me, yes to shimmer formulas, but don't make them all like duochromes and multichromes. I feel that sometimes brands are pushing it a little bit with the duochromes and multichromes, thinking like that's what people want. But I feel if you want to go duochrome or multichrome, just buy a couple of singles from an indie brand like Leona, and then you have your multichromes, and just make sure you have a couple of good mattes that they will go with, and then it's really pretty. But I feel with a multichrome, really to give it, like to do justice to the shadow, it should be the only shimmer you put on your lid, and the rest of the look needs to be matte for it to really sort of show up very well, at least on me. So that's why I feel we can do with fewer duochromes and actual multichromes. I feel that it should be really into like textures rather than like different shimmer textures. So maybe have something like that's a bit more transparent, and then something that's a bit more opaque, and perhaps something that's a bit more sparkly without it being glittery. I prefer that kind of like variation more so than duochromes or multichromes. Number 7, I kind of already touched upon this as well. please don't stop putting whites and black shadows in every single palette you do. I just want a good inner corner shimmer highlight, a topper, and a deep dark brown to deepen things up with. Then I'm happy. Black to stark, way too stark against my pale skin. If I use a black to deepen out a look, it just looks like I was punched in the face. Not a good look. Whites, far too stark. I get it. If you want to do something very dramatic, you want to carve things out and all that, I get it. But white can really alter the way a shadow looks like. You're far better off with something that's really close to your actual skin tone when you really want true, like the true vibrancy that a shadow has. So for me, a stark white, way too stark, way too clashing. A stark black, way too stark, way too clashing as well. So for me, it needs to be slightly different, but yeah. If I also look at how many white and black shades I have in my eyeshadow palette collection and I add them all up, I have enough white and black eyeshadow to last me a lifetime. So please stop putting those things in. Thank you. And I would like to add another shade actually to this list right here, right now, because I just mentioned it in a comment to someone who was actually making this point, like all these white and black eyeshadows. I feel the same way about gold. Gold. Luckily, gold can have like different qualities depending on how the shade is mixed. Like you can make it more of an antique gold if you add a bit of green. You can make it more of like a pale yellow. You can make it very yellow. You can make it a bit more bronze. There are a lot of variations of gold that you can think of. I just don't love gold eyeshadow on me because I have fair skin with a cool to neutral undertone. I feel golds can also be a little bit clashing, especially if they're very yellow, orange, or bronze leaning. And very often that's the kind of gold we get in palettes. So for me, again, like with white and black eyeshadow, if I add up all of the gold eyeshadow that I have in my makeup collection, again, I have enough gold eyeshadow to last me a lifetime. So please stop putting golds in everything that you do, because we don't. And I'm looking specifically at Pat McGrath here. She puts a gold in as part of her special shades in every single Mothership palette. Every single Mothership palette has a gold. Stop. Just stop. One is enough. I just need one gold eyeshadow that works for me, and then I'm happy. Number 8. I would like to see more mixes or equal amounts of neutrals and colorful shades in palettes. So this kind of harks back to my wish for colorful palettes to not be too monochromatic. And we do get neutral palettes with a pop of color, but very often that's just limited to 1 or 2 shades. So I wish that we could get palettes where half the palette is a neutral and the other half is a colorful shade. So I think actually the Naked palettes that were released a little bit later, like the Naked Ultraviolet, and what was the other one? The Wild West kind of does that. No, that just has a pops of some colors. But the Naked Ultraviolet is perhaps the best example of this. The Viseart Violette Étendue does this as well. However, you do need to make sure that those neutrals can go with the colorful shades. So I feel very often that, for instance, in that Naked Ultraviolet palette, we get a lot of peachy tone neutrals, and then we get purples. Like, on my skin tone, that's not the best match. Maybe if you have a warm skin tone, it does work, but I feel that the purples in the Naked Ultraviolet are quite cool toned, and I think that's why a lot of people didn't like that palette, because the purples are more cool toned, blue tone leaning, and they don't go very well with those peachy tones that are far more warm toned and almost yellow in some cases. So that's why I feel there's a bit of a clash. But yeah, I would like to see more palettes where we get a split between neutrals on the one hand, colorful shades on the one and the other, and that they can all work together. So you can do an all neutral look if you'd like, an all colorful look if you'd like, and just really make sure you can marry them together as well. I wish that was around a little bit more, but very often if a palette is neutral, it's just like a pop of green, a pop of blue, a pop of teal. We see some pops of purple here and there. Of course, by now, oranges are deemed neutrals by some people. But yeah, I feel that if we can just mix and match it a little bit better, that, and we can get an equal split, that could really rekindle a lot of people's love with eyeshadow palettes. I truly believe that. Number 9 is that palettes take into account that blend shades don't work for everyone. The amount of times where I have to say, well, this shade is too light for me, but this one is too dark for me. I need something that's in between. Of course, you can then pick those two shades together and then blend it together, or apply the darker shade with a very light hand and then put the lighter one on top, so you can usually mix and match it. But very often that only works if the undertone of the shades works for you. So if it's just about depth of shade, you can usually make it work. But if the undertone of the shades are completely off, then you can just not make it work. So make sure you put a cool toned and a warm tone transition shade in every single palette that you do. Maybe not every single palette that you do, but at least that there's something that everybody can use like that, because I feel that that's one of the reasons why people like or dislike palettes very often, is the transition and blend shades that you get. So a good crease shade, a good transition shade that is perhaps neutral enough that it pulls a bit warm toned when you use it on warm toned skin, and that it pulls a bit more cool tone if you use it on cool tone skin. If that could be made, wow, that would be revolutionary, and it would really change the eyeshadow palette game, in my opinion. But that's just, I think, something that not a lot of people are doing. I very often struggle, and this went into a lot of neutral palettes that I didn't like, that were very hyped up, that a lot of the shades were just far too deep for me and just not light enough to make it wearable for every day. So yes, it was pretty. I was able to pull stunning looks out of things like Too Faced Chocolate Bar, but it did look a little bit dark and sultry, like I was going out for like drinks after work rather than I was gonna teach that day. So I feel like if you want to cater to different undertones, I feel that we're moving into understanding that foundation shades need to have different undertones, that concealer shades need to have different undertones, but what is still very much lacking in understanding is that you also need that kind of variation when you put together an eyeshadow palette. There's only a few brands I feel that can really cater to all of those different needs that people might have. Natascha Denona is one of them. But I feel that not a lot of brands take that into consideration, that there's a good enough transition shade, crease shade, that can go with different skin tones. I just think that that's something we need to take into account a little bit more. And then the last point I want to make, and this is a huge pet peeve of mine, this happens in almost every palette you buy. Fewer repetitive shades. So very often, like the bigger the palette, the more likely this is to happen, but this is why I don't buy like 30 pan palettes. I feel like my sweet spot is around the 15, 16 pan mark. But even with those kind of palettes, if it's like 9, well, not even that, like if it's like 5 shades or less, I feel that that works. Then we don't get a lot of doubles. But the minute the palettes become a little bit bigger, there is always going to be a little bit of superfluous, a little bit of repetition, shades that don't go together really well. So can we just make it work and make sure we get versatile palettes that aren't too repetitive and aren't like giving us like too much? I've tried a couple, like I've tried the Stone Cold Fox from ColourPop, and I ended up just taking 9 shades out of it that I actually wanted to keep. And everything else I was like, hey, I already have it in my makeup collection somewhere. Or 2, this is actually a repetitive shade within the palette, which is even worse. So I feel that that's happening a lot, either within a brand, within a line of palettes where there's just a lot of repetition, but also within palettes, this repetition happens quite a lot. Like I said, especially in the bigger palettes. Do you need all those different nuances of all those different shades? Perhaps not. But I do feel that if we were to get fewer repetitive shades, brands also have to create more unique things. And they need to just think a little bit better about, you know, what they want to put into a palette, I feel. So less repetition, and I like, again, I think ColourPop is the real culprit here, because by now, if you look at new ColourPop releases, it's like this is just another rendition of what you did 2 years ago. So yeah, for me, less repetition, try to come up with new things a little bit more, and don't put the same shade or essentially the same shade in the same palette, especially if the palette is a little bit smaller. I always point this out. There are quite a few palettes on the market where you're like, did I really need that shade and that shade? Because when I blend them into the crease, they look identical. So that happens with a lot of brands actually, and it's a huge pet peeve of mine. So yeah, those are the 10 things that I would like to change, and palettes that I wish existed, or things that would just happen a little bit more often, or a little less often actually, so that we would just get some really fun, cool, exciting things again. Because I do feel I'm sort of getting a little bit of eyeshadow palette fatigue now that I've tried so many. I think I've reviewed, like, individual reviews of eyeshadow palettes over on my blog. I think there's over 300 or something crazy like that. Like, I've tried a lot of eyeshadow palettes in my lifetime, people. So yeah, I've tried so many things. So maybe it's also just that I'm just less likely to be excited about these things because I've tried so many things. I don't know. I don't know where I'm at the moment, but I think there's just still a lot of ground that we can cover when it comes to new eyeshadow palette releases. So I would love to know your thoughts, so leave those in the comments down below for sure. Thumbs up the video if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel because I keep on making eyeshadow palette related content this month. I'm not sure how many we have left by the time this one goes live, so I hope you'd like to stay tuned for more, and then I hope to see you in my next video. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye!